Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining this afternoon, which I'm sure will be a really interesting discussion. We're here today to talk about employee engagement in the new normal, which I'm sure is going to be a very interesting topic. So this webinar is hosted by ourselves, Soldo, and also Capdesk. I'm just going to begin actually with a quick poll for the attendees. So we're going to ask, here we go. What do you see as the key challenges to remote work for employees? So if you guys could just take a second to decide which of these you think is you see as your top key challenge, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'm just going to quickly introduce who we have today. So we have a really great team. We have Sarah, who's going to be our moderator. She is a leadership and business coach. Then we also have Asha, who is the COO and co-founder of Founders Academy. Then we have Dynshaw, who is the CFO of Soldo. And then finally, we have Christian, who is the CEO and founder of Capdesk. So I'll give you guys a couple more seconds for the poll results. Okay, so interestingly, the top one is motivation. So 60% of people said that motivation was your key challenge, so motivating employees to work at home. And then the other number, the second and third key challenges were seeing the vision of the company and also collaboration. So that's really interesting. Perfect. Okay, just to begin our debate and really interesting discussion, I'm going to pass over to Sarah. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Julia. So if motivation is your top concern, then you are in the right place today. So thank you all for being here. So I'd just like to start with a bit of a getting to know the panel. And I'm going to ask each of you to basically tell me a little bit about what motivated you when you were an employee and how that's evolved over the years. And I'm going to challenge you to keep that to 30 seconds. So Asha, if you'd like to go first, please.
The pressure. All right. When I was just starting out as an employee, I think my big motivation was seeing that there was going to be some sort of trajectory for me. So the first job I took, I was looking to see if they promoted people quickly, if I would get managerial experience quickly. And I also really cared about whether or not the function I was in was considered valuable to the company. So I was a computer scientist, so I wanted to make sure that engineering was considered an important function in the company I was working for versus support. Now what motivates me is quite different. I think I'm much more concerned about the mission of what I'm working on and also building an organization with impact. So that's evolved over time.
Thank you, Asha. Christian, please.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, but I'll give it a go. Probably a reason for that. But yeah, I think what really motivated me is I was one of those people who wanted to do more. Like I didn't just work, I wanted to do more than work. And I very easily felt, I guess, sometimes a certain sense of arrogance that they didn't really like acknowledge me, and I didn't want to work in the same way as other people did. I wanted to do much more, and I felt sometimes that they would tell me, you don't need to do anything more, it's fine. So I think that just like a sports team, if you've got somebody like a striker who really wants to be much better, make sure you can always super track him, like fast track him. And there wasn't really any place where I felt I could be fast tracked. I was kept in kind of these boxes, hence why I just made my own instead, I think.
Thank you, Christian. And actually you raise an interesting point, because actually contrary to the reasons for people encountering burnout, one of those reasons is actually not giving high-performing employees enough to do, and therefore they lose motivation. So thank you. Dynshaw.
For me, the biggest motivation is being able to contribute to the success of a company and then being recognized for it. And that's one of the reasons all throughout my career, I've chosen fast-growing companies to work for, because there are always milestones that are there to achieve. And there's always a satisfaction of achievement, provided, of course, you stop to celebrate it. Another big factor for me today is being allowed to get involved in the wider business. So while I do look after finance, Soldo, for example, is like a dream job for me because I love the fact that the product we are selling, which is liberating businesses from spending chaos, is targeted towards CFOs. So I'm involved in the product and I'm involved in what's happening with the product. So that's amazing for me as well.
Thank you for sharing. So I guess to summarize in keywords, it's value, being given enough to do and feeling that you are making a difference.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So obviously, as we all know, we are in challenging times at the moment, but there have always been challenges around motivating and engaging employees. And as much as we would like to say, okay, well, that's a problem with corporates, it can also be a problem with a startup environment as well. So what challenges have you been facing recently in motivating and engaging employees? And are these actually totally new and different challenges, or are they accelerations of old challenges? And I'm going to ask Christian first of all, please.
That's a hard one. I think we've seen several. To start off with, I think there's this misconception for a lot of junior and middle managed employees that the way they measure success is when can I get to manage other employees? And I think that's something that we see more and more and more, where I tell them that, maybe success is not managing other employees. Maybe success is, instead of going, deep down the organization, maybe it's going wide in the organization, creating new business tracks instead, because I don't want to have an organization where, so that's the first part. And then secondly, if you're a very good salesperson, then you're not necessarily a good sales manager, but the very natural promotion is to become a sales manager. And the same thing, you might be a very good support in client services, you might be good at supporting, but you might not be good at driving client services yourself. So it's finding that balance about coaching people to what they're really good at and making sure that they're motivated by not just managing people moving up into a role that's not good for them, and finding that balance. I find that's very tricky to get that right and to motivate them right, to know when to step down as well. So I think this is one of the problems we had. Like, if you get somebody who's really good at their job, and they do that for 2 years, to have a team of 10, then maybe the best thing you can do for them is actually hire a boss on top of them who have been through it before, who can teach them how to go the next 5 years. But does that demotivate them and so forth? And then secondly, I think that's the first challenge about this thing, that I think all human beings wants to develop and wants to manage, and we should celebrate something else. And then secondly, in these times, I think there's been a lot in terms of motivation and so forth, is seeing each other and having a beer. Like, what do we do when you just work at home? I think if you are a junior employee, also mid-manager employee, and you're at home and you have these successes, it's not enough just drinking a pint at home and watching something. You need to kind of make that community around the team strong. And I think we're all faced as manager with that problem, is how can I include everybody even though we're not together? That's been very challenging, I would say.
Thank you. And Dynshaw, do you agree or disagree with what Christian has said?
I agree with it, but I'll give you some of the challenges that I think companies face, especially in period of uncertain times. It's it's a tricky one, because how open so one way to address challenges is obviously the more you communicate, the more you sort of satisfy the employees and the more they're aware of what's going on. But the trade-off is, how much do you communicate? Do you be fully transparent, or do you shield them from the pressure of what's happening in the organization? So because as leaders, you take the pressure, do you actually want to push it down to the employees for them to take the pressure as well? And Soldo, obviously, we took the option of actually being much more transparent and telling people what was happening and how this would affect our business, but at the same time being very, very clear as to how we would get out of this and what is the plan to get out of it. And I think if you have that piece, it becomes then being transparent becomes very interesting. Another sort of interesting example, and this is the other way around, is, and I face this in my other businesses, is when you have subsidiary companies where you have a lot of people in different locations, generally they complain about not being in the loop, lack of communication from head office, not feeling part of the group. And suddenly you find COVID, your mindset changes, because something that I needed from a particular person, normally I would just go to the person next to me in the same office. Now everybody's equal. I just pick up the phone irrespective of where they are in the organization, and so therefore everybody feels included. So in a way, that has brought a different dimension of creating sort of engagement and motivation to employees, which may have been the other way around in a non-COVID or different occasion.
And you work with employees across different countries. Are you finding that different approaches work in different countries, or are you facing different challenges in different countries?
Yes and no. I'm finding it much easier to work with people in different countries without that barrier of being in an office, because I think inherently, like I said, when you're in an office, and it's wrong, you tend to ignore the people who are not in the office. And I think that's really important, that we have that communication and the communication stayed equally. Now, fortunately, currently we do not have issues of time. So everybody's in Europe, so everybody's within a 2-hour time period. So the time issue is not there. In previous businesses, if people were in the US or you were working in India, that became a big issue, because if you're US and India, for example, when India sleeps, US is awake, US sleeps, India's awake, and so it becomes more and more difficult in those situations.
Thank you. Asha, I'm curious to understand, because I know you've been working with people that have actually started jobs during COVID, so actually started just by working remotely. How are you working with them to try and coach them through that?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, Founders Academy is a program that involves, it's a 9-month program where there's 3 months of classroom experience and then a 6-month placement at a high growth, high impact tech scale up. So COVID happened right as we were doing the matching process for the placements that people were joining. So a lot of people only up until recently haven't even met their colleagues in person, even during the interview process. So they started interviewing in April, and then eventually, or started their placement in April, and then did the interviewing about a month before that. The way we've been coaching everybody, I mean, we all kind of dove into this together, right? And I think we've been setting up some forums for people to look for best practices for virtual working and virtual onboarding. As a tribe, we call them, they've been sharing on Slack best practices on how to navigate relationship building with their colleagues. We've been coaching them specifically on going a bit above and beyond what you normally would do to get familiar with an organization, to be able to build that rapport with your colleagues in a way that would come so naturally, as you know, Dynshaw mentioned before, just walking down the hallway and saying, oh, this person's new, they're here, and everybody just sort of says, oh, of course they're here, let's grab a coffee, let's grab lunch. That all of that sort of serendipitous socializing doesn't really happen without effort now. And so we've been encouraging people to find out who the kind of culture vultures are in their organizations, who are the people who are always talking on Slack, always showing up in meetings, always, you know, having the ear of the founders or everyone, and figuring out from those people how to engage and how to, you know, get the lay of the land. It might not always be your manager, it might be somebody else. And also we're encouraging them to find ways to have a digital presence, be it contributing to different Slack channels, writing articles for the wiki, speaking up during meetings, so that people can recognize who they are. And then frankly, also just setting up, it sounds awkward because it's not the same as coffee, but setting up little Slack calls and phone calls with people So that way they can get to know the rest of the team and set a challenge for themselves to put themselves out there. But generally speaking, we've told all of them to be very proactive because this is a crisis. It's very real, and a lot of the founders, unfortunately, won't always have onboarding and making sure that new employees are feeling comfortable at top of mind when they're trying to just keep the company afloat. So we've tried to encourage them to be patient with everybody trying to adjust to this new environment.
And I think that kind of connects in with what Dynshaw said as well, in that there are opportunities here to collaborate more with different people that you wouldn't normally talk to. There are opportunities to be more proactive. And actually, by being more proactive, you are more likely to make an impact at whatever company you're working for anyway. And I think, there are lots of things that you can do. I mean, for example, setting up meetings continuously with people that you don't usually talk to in different departments, and really creating that opportunity for cross collaboration. So on that note, I'd like to go back to Christian and say, what are you trying out to address these challenges, both for yourself and in the companies that you work with as well? And is there anything that you're noticing that is particularly working well or not working?
That's a hard one. Might be a little bit too early to say, but I think we're an equity management platform, right? So we help about 1,000 kind of fast-growing companies manage their equity. And what we have seen as a trend, which is interesting, is that some of our clients who has unfortunately had to lay off or do pay cuts to the employees, they've remunerated them with more options instead, which I think is quite interesting. So we're seeing that they're actually issuing more equity in order to compensate for the missing salary. And that to me is quite exciting, because it shows, if we just look at like compensation in general, nothing has really changed since the Industrial Revolution and how we do it. So if we could come to a point of view where startups do more equity, and if the employee are willing to take a higher risk, and we could create some liquidity programs for that, that's something that I'm very passionate about and hope I'll come out of the crisis. So we're definitely making, already planning also in Capdesk, how can we make more liquidity programs for our employees, and then issue more equity at the same time to completely align the incentive. So if they get issued an option with a certain share price, and the share price goes up, and I overfund my next funding round, then we can take the surplus and cash out secondaries, and then it's all a win-win. Everybody's aligned. But that's more on the financial side, so I can speak much more about that. I won't bother the attendees too much with that. But secondly, I think to Dynshaw's point as well, we've seen that it doesn't work having some people in the office and some people on the call. Like, that setup just doesn't work. So you either have to be everybody in the office, or everybody has to be remote first. So what we have recently done is that we've said that Capdesk is remote first. It means even if you're in the office and you're having a social at 5 o'clock, everybody grab on your headset and make sure to connect yourself, because we are catering for the ones who are remote. So they feel like they're in focus and not the ones in the office. And that's something that we've definitely see a change in. Whereas before we've both got some remote workers, and we've got office in Copenhagen and London. And we could see sort of the friction when we had a call, that there would be a little bit talking in the background and so forth. So I think this is the chance to actually align meetings centered around the ones who's remote first, instead of centering the ones who are in the office. And that's something we are really trying to push. And then making sure we record every session, so you can always go back and re-watch sessions. And then we've had some fantastic socials where we've been playing these weird games every Friday and drinking together throughout COVID. So I don't think we've ever felt closer as a team. So that's some things that definitely worked.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, because I guess the next question I would have had is, are employees really buying into these socials and they're getting excited by them?
I think so, but obviously I'm the wrong one to ask, right? We used to like it. I mean, we did have, throughout the COVID time, we've had a social every Friday, and more people would attend than usual because they were remote first. So some of the staff with kids, they could sit with their kids and play games on a Friday night. which would not happen before because they needed to leave early. So in that case, we actually felt like when we had these remote socials that we were actually catering to more people than we did before, because before the socials were very much like young professionals who have like who haven't got any place to be at the weekend. Then they would go out, which is also sort of a little bit discriminating towards the the ones who've got family and other obligations who also would like to be part of the culture. So I think we've seen some challenges and some solutions that we could be better at. I wouldn't say we've solved it, but we're getting there.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. It's bringing together people that might not necessarily socialize usually, because you're right, people with families might not want to go out for drinks on a Friday night, but this is a way that they can be involved as well.
Yeah, and we've seen the family join even, which has been amazing. Like one of my co-founders, he had like 2 kids in the call, and they were playing along in this game, and it just brings that different, I think, vibe to the company. That it's not just about us working hard and families being second. It's about let's cater for everybody here, and it's an awesome story for them to tell. That remember COVID times we were playing, games with on Dad's computer with this company. It's something else, and I feel like that that sentiment I'd like to continue as part of the culture. It doesn't need to be work hard, play hard, family second. We can combine everything together if we do remote first in a good way.
And Dynshaw, do you agree?
Yeah, so we do. I'll pick up both of Christian's points. I'll start with the non-financial first. So we do a lot of that in terms of we have yoga classes, cooking classes, pub quizzes, bingo nights. What we haven't tried, Christian, which I think we will, is include the rest of the family as well. We've sort of, it's right now it's been sort of more employees only, and there's a good take up. And like you said, Friday night, normally if people didn't want to stay, they are there. If you start at 5 o'clock or 5:30, people do engage a couple of hours, and you get a lot more interaction with the team. On the financial motivation side, that's a really interesting one. I've seen equity as a good motivator, and at the same time not a good motivator. I've seen in companies where employees just don't understand the value of equity because they don't see the success of that equity. And Christian, what you said was quite interesting to see, where you mentioned that actually you're giving benefit to the employee quite quickly. So as a secondary to a fundraising, that could be very interesting, because the minute people actually see that they are getting a financial benefit and they're seeing a precedent of somebody making money from it, then suddenly that equity becomes really a big motivator and a big value. The issue comes where you give people equity, but the exit is so far away that the value just doesn't, you don't crystallize the value, and people don't value it enough to be motivated enough. And it's just something that I have, it may happen, may not happen type of thing. I like what you suggested.
I think it's, and I think you're right, Dynshaw, but I think it's also the company to be blamed in a lot of sense. Like sometimes, because all we do is we digitize these option schedules, and sometimes it's exit only, right? So you can only get your options in the exit, which is almost, I feel at times it's like, why are you hiring this employee? And at times they actually make the option packages and remuneration so hard to understand because they really don't want to bother. And for me, it's such a shame, because I feel, as I always say, the most expensive employee perk you get is not a fitness membership, it's your employee share equity, but it's the one that nobody understands. And I think there's actually, when a crisis like this happens and we've got a downturn, you need to make hard decisions, it's sort of that North Star where you can align everybody about, because everybody wants their equity to be more valued, and they know they can recognize what to do because they don't want to lose it. So I think at times like this, we begin to look at something else than cash. And say, what am I really doing? What works for me? And I think the secondaries is something we hope will happen more, but let's see.
Yeah, so those are good points on equity, because I have to say the average person thinking about equity in a startup would quite rightly think, well, most startups won't work out. Most exits are too far away for me to even think about it at this moment in time. It's just a way of keeping me quiet, and giving me something without giving me something. But, if you actually take the time to communicate properly, this is what happens, this is why equity is important, as you say, it becomes a more compelling proposition.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, take everything what I said with a grain of salt. I mean, if you have a hammer that will look made of nails, and I just see employee share plans all over the all the time. So it is exciting.
Asha, so on the topic of kind of non-financial incentives and maintaining relationships in the times that we're in, do you have any particular thoughts or tips that you can share with us?
Yeah, like how to incentivize people in a non-financial way to stay motivated and to stay. Yeah, I think it's really important just to go back to the core of understanding at an individualized level what motivates people and why they're actually signing up to go on this journey with you, particularly in startups and scale-ups. People are usually making significant sacrifices to work with you, right? They might be sacrificing salary if it's an earlier stage company. They might be sacrificing time because they have to dedicate way more time than they would in a more corporate environment, and really getting to the heart of what is their North Star. What are they trying to get out of this? If you go back to Reid Hoffman's alliance, that tour of duty. I think modern employees are usually wanting to work places for a couple of years, up to 4 years, and seeing what their goals are. If you have that alignment of goals, that's much more important and effective in creating incentives for people than a foosball table or a gift card to a movie. Both of those things don't exist now with COVID, but you get my drift, like a discount on Netflix or something like that. Because I think those are just icing on the cake, but the cake itself really matters, which is like, how are you going to help me with my career? How are you going to give me the attention and the coaching and the support and the development that I need to hit the goals that I want, both for me to be successful in this role and for my career overall? And I think it's interesting with the poll results now that there was a what's the most important thing earlier at the beginning of the webinar was motivation, but actually I think learning and development is actually an underpinning that. I think when you invest in L&D, you invest in supporting people and in their growth and their journey. I'm not talking about just like a one-off webinar, but truly having proper employee development plans for people, then that has a direct connection with their motivation in work, because they know someone cares about them being there and they're wholly invested and aligned with goals and engagement.
I'll just add one thing to what you've said as well, and I find that it's a small thing, but it does go it goes a long way, is actually taking time to recognize people and celebrating success. I think we just don't do it enough, and especially in smaller companies, that personal touch of a CEO going to you and saying, wow, you did an amazing job, well done. We underestimate that recognition and that sort of pat on the back. It goes a real long way to people. They feel recognized, they feel part of the business, they feel that they've contributed something and people have seen what they've contributed. That's a really important factor.
I completely agree with that. And I actually think that goes even further when it's balanced out by constructive feedback on a regular basis too, because then people know that you are being honest with them, and that you're actually, when you do give that, super positive feedback, you really shined, right? Because you're giving them development, you're giving them support, and you're being transparent with them about their career in a way that doesn't feel like it seems like it runs hollow if they never hear anything constructive. We hear a lot of people on our program where all the feedback they've been getting is like, you're fantastic, you're great, just keep doing what you're doing. And they almost get suspicious of that. They're like, wait, where's the development? I know I'm not perfect. Tell me the good stuff. Be honest with me. And so I think managers should feel comfortable giving people feedback, both positive and constructive, on a regular basis, not on just waiting for some annual review or quarterly review or whatever. And I think when you do that, you're going to have extremely engaged staff who are going to want to be with you and work with you, because they'll feel like someone's paying attention to their work.
But I also think that's one of the challenges, right? Because right now, I think a manager's job at assessing more interpersonal skills and like developing those. So obviously, if you do it, if you're a techie and you make something, you say your code is bad and so forth, with your sales guy, marketing guys, and one together, I feel like us managers are not equipped well enough in order to make constructive feedback in a remote setting, because it kind of means you have to find a balance of not supervising, but saying, hey, I want to listen. Can you send one of your calls to me? Or, hey, can I join in this call? Because you want to be there to make feedback, but you don't want to kind of, they shouldn't feel like you're there to monitor their work. So how do you get that balance right? I think it's quite tricky, because you need to get direct feedback, which is not just, yeah, you did your sales results, great. You need to be, hey, I heard you that sales call. You could maybe connect with this and this person to perfect it. And I think that's quite hard.
Well, I think that goes into the territory of micromanagement, which is probably not the most optimal management style for getting the best out of people. But given that let's take the sales example, salespeople are there to get results. So the question becomes, are they getting those results, or are they not getting those results? And if they're not getting those results, then that's when an open conversation can take place, where you actually, dig down and, ask them to explain what is going on for them at that moment in time, really listen, understand what's both being said and not said, so that there is constructive feedback for them to be able to do better without it feeling like you're micromanaging them.
The challenge there, because you almost said it, is that you don't get any feedback if you do well. Because how would you do feedback if you did well? How will you get constructive feedback if you're doing well? In this case, you only get constructive feedback if you're not doing well. And so it's not micromanagement, but it's how can we continue to improve you? Because if you're just doing well, all I know as managers, you reach your results. Great.
Yeah.
Great. So how do we find that balance where we can continue to push them in a career without micromanaging? I think that's the hard way thing. So they don't just get constructive criticism if they do a bad job.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying. I think the approach is still the same, to say, okay, you're hitting all your targets. Is there more that you want to do? Should we be upping your targets? Is there something else that you want to do within the company? Is there learning and development to make you even better? So again, I think it comes back to listening.
Yeah,
Asha, you look like you're going to say something.
I was just going to add something. I was going to add something, is particularly with the sales scenario as we're talking about it, because I think it's quite familiar. I think there's also another way to get what you're talking about, Christian, is this idea of, let's say someone is hitting their targets and everything's going really well. There is a hygiene factor in checking in on people that isn't micromanagement, but is just also understanding what's working in the business and what's not. And I wonder if there's a way of structuring some of these things. It's like, you're smashing it and some other people are struggling. I'd love to listen in on your call to understand what you're doing well, so we can institutionalize some of these ways of working and make this something that, the rest of the organization can improve upon. So I think you shouldn't feel like you can't know about the company and that you're stepping on people's toes to know, but you need to make your intentions clear as to why you're engaging with someone in such a close way. Because if it's a mystery, they're going to feel like it's micromanagement. Someone's jumping, like, why are you here? Why are you trying to follow me? You're trying to look for dirt, and it's like, no, I'm actually trying to learn. You're the expert. I'm trying to learn from you as the expert how you work, so that way we can spread. I can help facilitate spreading the best practices of what you're doing. And if there's anything that you're struggling with, maybe I can also help facilitate helping you with that too. But it all comes from trust, honestly. I think if there's a lack of trust, then there's going to be a lot of that skepticism.
Exactly.
And that brings up an interesting question in my mind. How do you build those bonds of trust with your employees? And I'm going to leave that open to whoever wants to answer.
Dynshaw, you've got this.
So I think, let me just add one point to what Asha said, is I think it's really important that it's very, very clearly articulated what is expected from your employees, what the targets are, what is success in effect. Because once you articulate that carefully and well, then you can always, there's something to measure against, and you can always benchmark against it. And people know, if I've not achieved that, I'm not doing well. If I have achieved that, I'm doing well. I think that piece is a big piece. But coming down to trust, I think it starts off with it's all about culture. I think it's culture of an organization. It's how do you empower employees? How do you create a culture where people are allowed to experiment, allowed to innovate, and more important, allowed to fail without having a blame culture, if you know what I mean. Can you allow people to make mistakes or create an environment where they can make mistakes that are not detrimental to the company? Of course, you have to have those controls, but they can make mistakes, but at the same time, you know, if they make those mistakes, the cost of those mistakes is not a thing, but it's a learning for them. I always have this saying that I say quite often is the key to success of a company is the ability to fail fast. And what I mean is that you provide, and you can only fail fast is if you have real-time information available to you. So you can see what's working, what's not. And the beauty for us in an organization like Soldo is our whole product is all about real-time information. So we can see things that are happening and immediately act upon, is something working, is something not, and then therefore address it and stop it. So I think ultimately, it's if people get comfortable that you can work in an environment where people are not going to blame you, but at the same time you are responsible for something that hasn't worked, and therefore let's give you more training, more development time on it, so you can better. Then I think it's all about culture in my view. I may be wrong, but that's my personal view.
But I also think it's about transparency, because in the end of the day, like all a manager's job is, my job as CEO is, I just translate what the board and my customers would like, and ideally my team, I translate that into tasks for my team to represent my customers, right? And that's why it's been very important for us that I have invited my employees to my shareholder meetings, so they know, and we share like our board minutes with our employees, so they know exactly why does the management want this, why are we working on it. So that level of transparency, so they understand what are we working on and what are the stakeholders want. And then we make sure, you know, to have some sort of decent Slack culture where, you know, all problems are there on the surface. So so you'll be able to see customers that are annoyed, you'll be able to see investors that, so everything's just out in the open, so we can all come over together and you understand the decisions. Because I feel like the worst thing you can do is kind of, as management, is to package things so they don't come super clear on why is managing. Like, there's nothing worse when employees are like, well, do you think this person's going to be fired? I don't really know. Or do you think management is going to close down this office? The more transparent you can be from the get-go, I think has worked much more to our favor than our disadvantage. Of course, there might be some hiccups, and when you reach a certain size, maybe you can't do it anymore. But I think strategy and clear feedback and transparency is quite important.
And I think transparency is part of culture, because you have also that culture of the leadership communicating and being transparent, because without having that clear communication, employees won't feel comfortable doing what Dynshaw referred to of trial and error, and being comfortable with failure and being able to learn from it.
Exactly. It's hard one to get right though.
Yeah, I think that's my next challenging question. How do you go about living that culture within an organization? And I express living because it's one thing theoretically saying this is what we do, but if the leadership does something completely different, then, you know, people can see through that quite easily. So do you have any ideas of how to solidly entrench such a culture within a startup?
So I'll take that to start with. So in my career, I've worked mainly for entrepreneurial businesses, so businesses which are generally run by a founder and then they build it. And the one thing that I've seen quite continuous is the initial culture of the business flows from the personality of the entrepreneur. It starts with that, and once it starts with that, then everything flows from there. So like, and you rightly said, Sarah, is it has to be led from the top. If the person at the top is not doing what we are preaching, nothing is going to flow through in the culture of the business. So that personality, the leader of the business, how they deal with experimentation, how they deal with what's working, what's not, how transparent they are, like what Christian said, how open you are, how can you say, okay, actually we got this wrong, let's stop it. It didn't work for these reasons, and then nobody's fault, but we learn from it, and so on and so forth. So it's one is the personality of the leadership team and what they're actually doing, and the second, the most important thing is the communication of the culture that you want. The culture, yes, is there, but a lot of it is also how you communicate the culture. How do you talk about things that you want to happen with the organization positively? So how do you reward people who are doing the right things? How do you penalize people who are not doing the right things, and so on and so forth? So that communication and then showing that through, ultimately it's a clear articulation of a common plan, common goal, and how each team and each individual is contributing towards it. And then around that, what is acceptable as good practice and what is not acceptable as good practice.
I think you're completely right, Dynshaw, and I also think it's one of the I think there's a parenting book once that said the best way to be a parent is just to be there. And I think the same goes for being a CEO. Like, I can't be right about everything I do, but I make sure to be there and actively pursue my employees. Like every month, I make sure to have a one-on-one with at least all my employees, know where they are and get to understand them. Not about business, just like how are you doing? And that's the unfair advantage you can do when you're not that many people. So you should use that. So if you're a company where the CEO can still get to talk and have a personal relationship with everybody, then you should definitely do that, because that's the unfair advantage. So I think it's just being there. Like, they shouldn't come to you, you should come to them, say, hey, how are you doing? I want to speak to you. And then, as you said about the culture, like, I always make sure that we're having a social someone. I would go down to the ones like the juniors or the ones who are more introverts. I'll speak to them because I know that it's not about you, it's about the team and being there for them. So they feel, and going out sometimes, where I can make the most difference sometimes is I go out with the juniors. They're like, oh, we're out with my CEO drinking beers on a Tuesday. And it just means so much to them, but it doesn't mean, so I feel like you can really embrace that by just being there for them and being a strong presence in the company. And then very much highlight not to be a know-it-all, but to be more servant leader. Say, I'm there for you. Like, I don't have the right answers, but I can help you with any problems you're there. I think I see it again and again, these CEOs who comes in and they've seen a little bit too much Dragon's Den and think they have to be this hard-ass CEO that's like, you do this or you're fired. And I don't think that's not how management works. You just hire people that are better than you and you're just there for them. And I think culture will come by itself then if you recruited the right people.
And I love those words, servant leader. That's what you're about. You're there to bring the best out of the people you work with so you can build something remarkable. And Asha, you look like you are dying to say something.
No, it was definitely what Dynshaw said. So I was it was sparking an idea in my head about, I think culture, talking about culture coming from the top. I also think culture has everything to do with what the company looks like when things go wrong. So it's really easy to have a great culture when times are great, money's flowing, cash is coming in, customers are happy. The real test of your culture is when things are terrible, right? Something broke, the product isn't working, a big customer left, you had a down round, whatever it is. When you have those tests, those really tough times, and everyone's going to be looking directly at the leadership team to see how they respond to those difficult moments. And in those moments, if the leaders show catastrophizing, if they show like really severe responses, and they start lashing out, or don't keep their cool, or don't focus on strategizing and getting through that issue in a measured way, then people will pay attention. And I think it doesn't have to be as big a deal as some of those bigger issues, but if something goes wrong where someone misses a deadline, do they get yelled at for that, or do they instead have a chance to strategize and brainstorm what happened there? They'll pay attention to those patterns, and if they see those patterns not playing out where people get a slap on the wrist if they make a mistake versus it being a learning moment, that's when you'll see people either deciding to take risks or to hold back and say, well, I know I'm going to get in big trouble if I bring anything up that's bad, so I'm just going to keep it to myself. And that's the worst thing you want to have happen in a company as it's growing. You need everybody to be sharing and providing information, whether it's bad or good. So I think culture is not just about the good times, it's about the really bad times.
I think it's a really good point.
Agree.
Thank you to all the panelists. I know this is now time for Q&A. I'm not sure if there are any questions, Julia or Kartik. I guess if there aren't any questions, we can summarize and wrap up. I'm going to take silence as I'm going to take silence as there possibly aren't any questions. Okay, so I'm basically then just going to ask each of you to summarize final thoughts, and then we can end the webinar. So Asha, final thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think final thoughts are communication is going to be really important during this time for engagement. So I would just say do your best to communicate even more at a higher frequency with your teams. They're craving it. They want to know what's going on. They might feel in the dark being at home. And so just putting as much effort into frequency, transparency, openness, and even providing a forum for people to also then express themselves. So don't make it just Twitter where you're shouting from a megaphone, but make it something more of a two-way engagement as much as possible. And I think that's what's going to help people get through this time.
Thank you, Asha. Christian.
Yeah, I think to echo both what Asha and Dynshaw said several times, I think we really owe it to employees to develop them. And we don't know how to do that yet in a complete way. So I think we have to be open towards just changing our methodology in this remote first culture and keep on knowing that we haven't got the final answer and just really be there for the employees in terms of development, no matter how hard the decisions and the processes are. So I think that's definitely my takeaway.
And I guess just to add to that, you know, it's a big thing actually sometimes to say, I don't know everything. I'm in the process of trying to figure this out and trial and error for myself, because that is also being vulnerable, which actually engages with people because they feel that you're being honest and transparent. Dynshaw, please.
No, I totally agree. I think communication is vital. You have to communicate what the plan is of the company, the goal, how each team is contributing towards that goal, how individually you're contributing towards that goal. I think that's absolutely critical. I love what Asha said about leading from the top, especially in times when things are going wrong, because that's what's going to be remembered and that's what will set the culture of the company. I think that's really good advice and something that we should look at. I also think it's creating an environment where people can flourish, they can fail fast, as I said, and reiterate all the points that Christian and Asha said as well.
Awesome. So for anyone listening, if you do have any questions, you can send them to marketing@capdesk.com. But otherwise, thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to Capdesk and Soldo for inviting me to moderate this. And I hope listeners found it useful.
Yeah.
So thanks very much and have a lovely Wednesday.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.